Uh, Welcome. Find any seat you like. Well, now that you've talked about a little bit and shared with someone why you're here or why you think you might want to be here, you're not sure yet, I'll tell you what we decided why we were here, what our objectives are. You know, I'm a consultant, and we structure environments for people to be able to be innovative and have good conversations. So a lot of my job is to make sure we're aligned when we start. And if what you wanted is not what we're doing, I want to make sure we've bridged that without, and making it very intentional, okay? The learning has to be kind of, you have to be with it and want it, and if what we're doing is a little different, stay, and we'll see if we can, in our interactive question and answer, actually come together on what you're looking for and what we have to share, okay? Our objective is to learn how 3 corporations are intentionally engaging employees from different generations through ERGs and BRGs. And as I said before, your organization may call them something else, but we also would want to appreciate together how ERGs can create opportunities for intergenerational awareness and innovation to better serve generationally diverse markets and workplaces. Our third goal is to share real-life experiences in what has worked well and what has not worked well, and ideas for the future. And as I've said before, this is a relatively innovative idea, this intergenerational ERG. So with that, I would like to invite each of our panelists to tell us a little bit how their ERG is structured, even before we get into how it got there, what the context was and why. First, we'd like to kind of represent what your organization is right now doing in terms of the structure of ERG, and then we can back up and talk about why that is. Okay?
All right, we'll kick it off. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to the session, and most of all, doing the work of coming to the actual summit, right? It's all on you, and we would really love to make this as interactive as possible. Excuse me. But if there's any questions that anybody has, right, please feel free to jump in, because we do want to make sure that you're walking out of the room with something you can use. Excuse me, frog in my throat. So with IBM, I am the president of the TriState Asian ERG, but also have founded and co-led a organization the last 5 years called Millennial Core. We have evolved since then. We turned Millennial Core into the Next Gen Core, into the Global Innovation Core, and I'll tell you a little bit of that reason and those challenges of why we did that through our journey. So we've done that the last 6 years. We've grown to be a very grassroots. It's not a formally HR-backed BRG, but we have had global reach and over 6,000 people in our community just from word of mouth and being able to reach out to our millennial constituency. So from there, we got a lot of sponsorship. We had a summit in 2016 with our CEO about business transformation inside of IBM, and we also dedicated a team of entrepreneurs to this effort. So that's a brief summary of how we're structured right now, but we'll get into the reasons why and what we're actually doing.
Hi, I'm Kristen Hawley, and I'm with Macys, and I'm a co-leader of our Millennial ERG. Similar to what Christina was saying is that we started as Millennial ERG, and then we've kind of opened it up to be more young professionals, and we can talk a little bit more about kind of why we decided to do that in a little bit. But the current structure is young professionals and really helping to make sure that they feel that they have a voice in the company, even though they might be in lower levels, and that they feel that they have an opportunity to network, and to really drive business and make those changes that they're hoping to make. Macys has had kind of formalized, I guess, HR-sponsored ERGs for quite a while now. We have about 9, and Atlas is one of them. And so we have had some backing from HR, which is definitely helpful, and our CEO is very, very passionate about diversity and inclusion, and so very interested in the conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria Loyopoulou. I represent Bank of America. I am based here in New York and I am the co-chair of the Intergenerational ERG, or as we call it, Enterprise Network. I was asked to go last because Bank of America has a very structured way of, providing ERGs to our employees. In terms of numbers, we are more than 200,000 people in 58 countries, and we do have a line, not a line of business, but we do have a formalized way to D&I. We have the markets, which are basically larger cities such as New York. So we have 19 markets. So I lead the intergenerational network for New York. And there's another leader in Chicago or Charlotte and so on. But on top of that, we also have at the enterprise level an iGen network, which goes across all the 19 markets and beyond. Very recently, we launched India. And on top of that, we also have a virtual iGen network for people who are not in the major markets. Now, you need, in order to have a full view of how we do this, is you multiply that by at least 10, because we also have the women's network, the Asian network, the Black professional network, and so on. And it is not HR backed, it's basically on its own, sponsored directly from our CEO, and very much integrated into our culture, and very important for us to make Bank of America a great place to work. That's my intro. More to come. Yeah, thanks.
That intersectionality
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
challenge. I'd like to throw it out to all of you to tell us more about how your organization came to create these ERGs around intergenerations.
Yeah, I'll pass it. I don't need to always be first. So
I can start. So earlier in this session, Eugene Kelly from Colgate mentioned that they had kind of some group, they probably didn't call it an ERG, when he first started, that was about, intertwining the generations. So it's really interesting. It's not entirely a new idea, but I think it's becoming more and more formalized. And I think, the Macys definitely wanted to engage from a culture standpoint the new generations that were coming in and into the workforce, and we're naturally kind of changing that culture. So this is a little bit more of a focus and a purposed change in how do we focus on that culture and how do we kind of meld the two together. And with that, an example of one of the first initiatives that our ERG led was a dress for your day policy. So being able to wear jeans any day. Obviously, if you're in a meeting with CEO, you might not want to wear jeans, but kind of a more relaxed dress code policy. And so that was kind of the step into the culture of bringing the new millennial generation that started in the workplace and really kind of melding it with the rest of the Macys community. But then also Macys as a company had an initiative to go after the millennial consumer from a retail standpoint. And so it really made sense for the millennials working for the company to come together and present and create initiatives for how the company can go after their target segment. So it was kind of a clash of, a combination of culture and then business need that kind of led us to this generational.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to ask a quick question. Was the decision to do things like the dress for the day informed by your ERG or by they came together and said, we really want to do this, this makes more sense to us?
Yeah, so the ERG came together and said that this is something that's important to our generation, and then partnered with our HR counterparts and some of our management to make it a company-wide policy. So it was a very early example of how the millennial generation, kind of formed an ERG because they were ultimately changing the culture with or without the ERG there.
Yeah, I want to share some numbers because obviously we're bankers, so we like to justify everything before we make any decisions, right? And this is not why we did the intergenerational, but I think we try to quantify what it means. So there is, of course, there are many studies, but one of them says more than 1 in 3 people waste 5 or more hours each week, which is 12%, due to chronic and addressed conflict between colleagues from different generations. So that basically means that, we interact with people, we interact with clients all the time. There are many things that there might be frictions or something that happen that people would, if they took a step back and think a little bit more about the way we approach things or how we communicate. This might be due to generational differences. I know that this is a fact definitely for cultural differences, but it is also a fact that we have 5 generations in the workplace. There will be a 75% of millennials and zillennials by 2025, but we still have X and traditionals and baby boomers. And your example about the dress code is great. The other one is communication. I manage a team of young smart professionals that choose to text me at night and say, I'm not coming tomorrow because I have to pick up a delivery, which I would never do because this is not how I was, taught to do things with my boss. But I do take a step back and say, okay, this is how things are being done now. So that is just an example of if we all step back and meet in the middle, then there's a real effect in productivity as well as client and employee satisfaction. Yeah.
Awesome. The origin of how IBM came to be with its intergenerational ERG or BRG came from a place of passion. So if you know IBM, if you know anything about it, we started in 1911. We're 109 years old, very similar to Pfizer, Colgate, where our demographic and our workforce is aging, right? And it's been a company that's been around for a little bit. And so it came from an area of, being in meetings and having people who had been tenured for a very long time there. And a lot of the folks who were just coming into the workforce felt that their perspectives were not being heard in these areas, right? And there was no cross collaboration between the generations. It was very hierarchical. It was incredibly about seniority. Now I'm talking about 7 years, 8 years back, right? Since then, the company has undertook, a huge effort to refresh the talent, to reskill, to turn continuous learning, right? So you're reskilling and reinventing yourself, similar to what we heard this morning in the panels. And so it really started very grassroots from there. It started with literally 3 people spreading the word and effort on being able to bring a different perspective to the table for a company like IBM. And since we are B2B, we don't, necessarily aren't consumer facing, but a clear distinction and a clear realization by our leadership team was that these millennials or Gen Z or Gen Xers will become your leadership, right, eventually. And so also understanding how you can retain that talent to be able to run a company like IBM that has so much history. It is a lot of institutional knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a sort of a switch that happened. We've very much switched into agile methodology, into adaptability, into being able to pivot quickly with the market, and at the same time also invest in technologies that we have not traditionally been investing in, right? So for example, if you remember IBM from 8 years ago or 10 years ago is really about servers and PCs, and most people still think we're PCs, but we're really a software and services company now, right? So we go up against the Accenture and Deloittes of the world, but we also, on the flip side, have the technology that goes against, Amazon and Google and cloud. So, it's a very interesting time to be part of that transformation, but I could honestly say in the transformation, this intergenerational group of change agents who are just passionate about seeing IBM stand another 100 years were really the source of the inspiration for that, right? So similar to what Indra said this morning, it's about your livelihood, your values, about where, you see yourself within the brand and within the company.
So you're thinking about the function of an ERG and hearing about your 3 cases. I'm hearing partly the internal drive from the employees and the new generation coming up, and it's the recruitment, the development, the retention. And you also have the linkage with the market, which very much in Macys' case, that's such a close relationship between who are our constituencies out there, who are we marketing to, what is the demographic, and what are those trends, and can we stay in the game? We can't stay in the game if we don't respond to our market. Now that you've each arrived at the model you're using and at the point in your history that you are, and these are organizations that have had to transform numerous times to stay in the game over a century,
Yeah.
So now with this new
I know, I look good for that age.
Right. With this new transformation, what are the dynamics that you're seeing? And I'd like you to be very real, because I know in real life things are messy, and when you're in the middle of it, and we'd kind of like to get more of a look at what you're seeing, what's working, what's not working, what are the dynamics, and is it really succeeding in the way you mean for it, or where are you going from here?
Yeah.
If you've stumbled.
Yeah, so definitely, of course, we can quantify that as well. So how do we measure success? First of all, do we have enough members in our ERG, right? So at the moment, we have 10% penetration, which is not good. To our defense, we are a relatively new, so only 3 years now. But the reality is that in an intergenerational network, everyone who's born belongs. So there's really no excuse not to be part of it. So what we're trying to do is attract more members and also get feedback. One of the things that we're trying very hard to push is reciprocal mentoring, which I think works well, and many older people have had a chance to learn from younger people, including myself. And it's not the stereotype of technology, it's also how do you approach your career, how do you see yourself, how do you brand yourself, how do you present yourself, and also the awareness that there's real competition between a millennial talent and someone who's seasoned but is still waiting for something more. So that would be my take.
You really
Yeah.
have to sell and bring in
Yeah.
people to be members of
Yes.
what you believe is going to serve
Yes.
the company well if people
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I would say for the Atlas ERG, as I mentioned before, we started as a millennial specific ERG, and then we came to the conclusion that we should kind of open it up to young professionals, and that's somewhat of a generic term. And so I think we've had some, trouble with our colleagues understanding kind of what we're all about without having a 1 or 2 sentence conversation with them. What we really saw was that, with the new generations coming in, we really needed to kind of adjust our mindset of who the young professional is. At the time that the ERG was started, millennials were the youngest generation in the workforce, and now we're slowly not the youngest. And so, how do we include that next generation? Even though we have differences, how do we kind of include it all as young professionals and people trying to grow in their careers? But I do think that it was a slight struggle to kind of make that change, and it did take probably up to about a year to actually market and change the name of the ERG and the purpose of the ERG from millennial to young professional, which might have kind of muddied our identity with our colleagues, and so we're still kind of working on that. But I think that it's important to continue to adapt with the ERGs and with the way that businesses run and your company's moving and changing. So I think it was really important to do so.
And I just want to comment from things I've read, the millennial millennial term, people are very ambivalent about it because of how the media has handled it. And
Yeah.
they talk about shaming, generation.
Yep.
shaming.
Yeah, definitely. And that was a piece of, why we wanted to kind of change our identity, because there is somewhat of a negative tone or undertone to millennial, depending on whether you are a millennial or you're another generation, and kind of assuming different things about millennials. So that definitely was a thought process with what we, when we decided to change.
So I'll speak on behalf of IBM. What's worked well is really having clear sponsorship and a mission, and what our intergenerational organization was going to be responsible for, also leading. That was really helpful in making sure that we could go to all of our senior vice presidents, as well as anybody in the higher ups, and have the backing of certain key figures that were in our organization, right? So that's worked incredibly well for us, and that's really how we amped up and ramped up, these members. And the 6,000 members that are currently in our community are active members, right? So we've reached a lot more people, but I'll say there's actively 6,000 people around the world kind of pushing out, and we call them our ambassadors, if you will. And I think what's not worked well is, and what's been a lesson for us is that, similar to Macys, right, there's been an involvement. Certainly when we started, it was a bunch of millennials who have now, right, passed another 8 years, added another 8 years to their career now. But a few of us who are just saying, hey, we just want the perspectives to reach the upper echelons of our company, right? So in some ways, we accomplished that. After our summit, we really took some of this transformational work into our own hands, if you will, into the employee experience and into the culture. But I think a challenge that we faced was not only evolving that and making sure that it wasn't an us versus them mentality, it wasn't millennials versus everybody else, it wasn't next gen versus everybody else. So that's why the name changed similarly, right? So it's from Millennial Core to Next Gen Core to now Global Innovation Core. And global innovation really signifies, again, what I said earlier is about change agents. It does not matter what generation you are part of. If you have an open mind, if you have accountability, if you're passionate about the brand, that's the type of person we want, right? So that was a big learning for us, if you will, as intergenerational, because anybody from any generation can feel that passionately about the brand and have that much energy and be as green as the day they stepped off of school, right? And that was something that we really tried to really pivot. I would say that it takes a little bit of convincing, and clear communication and articulation of that mission is now our goal, to be able to expand that cross-generationally. But the leaders do look to us for innovative ideas, right? They do look to us for being sounding boards of how we should be approaching the market in the future. What we say at IBM is we want a future-proof IBM, right, in the next 100 years. So that's really been our quote-unquote mission within the company. I will also say a challenge for us has been thinking about how do you actually produce work that does cross-generational and challenges some of the status quo of, like, for example, now we have millennial managers. They are managing people who are older than them generationally. That creates some unconscious bias, right off the bat. I made first line manager rather early in age, and I had a lot of veterans reporting to me. And I tell you, it took time. It took time and trust and building relationships, and that's the $1 million, right, silver bullet. It's just getting to know each person. There is no fast way of doing that. It's making sure that they can trust you and your ability to deliver. But sometimes that takes time, right? And sometimes you have to be patient. So it's moving the needle a little bit to try and challenge some of that status quo. It was a great anecdote. One of the folks who reported to me said he had been at IBM 25 years. He has a son my age. And he said, I think I'm going to listen to my son a little more. Listen to what he says, right? Listen to his thoughts and what he's thinking about. That was an incredible compliment to me. I don't think he took it as that, or meant it as that way, but it was an incredible compliment to me, because that's breaking the bias. That's again making sure that 5 generations feel included in their work and their impact and their value, and that's the most important when we talk about diversity and inclusion, right? So, and then that's the same for any other minority as well. It's not just Asian, but certainly even within the Asian culture, there is some inherent hierarchical, right? Must respect my elders, can't talk back, gotta, right? And so, I think that falls into a lot of, implicit bias. And what do you guys think for the Asian culture, since I love your perspective on it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the way we see diversity right now is a combination of so many things. Definitely from the younger generations, diversity is changing in the sense that they also care about your experiences. The Generation Z is the most multicultural generation with expectations from their employers to be multi-generational, multicultural, and I would use the word sophisticated. I don't know if that's the right word, but when you have multiple experiences around different things, that for me means sophistication. So like I interview a lot of young people and they all ask all these questions about, the environment and how they would work with us.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would also say that I think it's really important to the younger generations, diversity and inclusion. But I think what all generations need to kind of focus on is what does that word diversity mean? It doesn't necessarily mean who's sitting in the room, but how you're expecting them to act, how you're acting towards them, and I think the conversation should be, multicultural, and everybody should have a seat at the table, but it should be kind of open for a conversation and something that all generations feel comfortable talking about and addressing, because the more you assume it's not there or pretend it's not there, the more it's going to have power in a negative effect.
Yeah.
I want to start to open this up for questions and comments from the audience, but I have the privilege of being moderator, so I want to lead off with two things that came to my mind, and then we can kind of open it up. But two things. One is the issue of the impact that you feel you have so far in having the ear of the organization. I mean, do you really feel, gee, they really listen to us and isn't this great, or we're still really frustrated, we've got to push, they created us, or they want us to be created, but meanwhile it's still an uphill battle getting them to listen. The second one was the skill building piece. I mean, you've just raised so many issues, and again, I don't want to hog up the question, but I want to just open it up. The skill building, it seems to me diversity really is, and you're pointing this out, it's about how you interact. It's the skill, it's what we call skills. I don't know if that's part of what you see as your mission with your groups to visit that intentionally. I don't know. I'm just raising those are questions I have in my mind.
I can take the second one. So I think that Macys has done a really good job of kind of making sure that the ERGs in total are a collective kind of organization. And one thing that I thought was really, really awesome that they did was they offered up to members of the ERG opportunity to test out basically the unconscious bias training that they wanted to roll out to the entire company. And so it was, we went in person, we had different moderators. They wanted to see kind of which moderator, which program, which company worked best with our values. But with that, it was a really, really great conversation about unconscious bias and how, the way to combat that is to be conscious about it and to be conscious about what your assumptions and the things that you are thinking in the back of your head that you might not feel like you can say, but you really should be thinking about what you're thinking so that you know why you're acting a certain way or how you can change the way you're acting. And so I think from just a total ERG standpoint, I think that that is one of the biggest pieces and most important things about ERGs is changing overall culture, and whether it's just the Millennial ERG or the Asian ERG or the African American ERG, I think as a total it's all people who are very passionate about the culture of the workplace. And so I think it's very helpful to have people kind of go through this unconscious bias training and really talk about the culture as a whole.
From my perspective, they're definitely listening. We have implemented a lot of changes in the workplace. We do have support from the top. I'll give you an example. We have started interviewing people via video. We are also receiving CVs in YouTube-like mode. We do have I am with emojis that everybody loves. Not enough. We need more. We did go into an open floor plan, which is great for younger people to have direct communication with senior leaders. So they're definitely listening, and all eyes are now shifting to the new generation, where we're trying to be prepared in terms of what their expectations are. And number one is obviously technology. What they require from their employer on day one is definitely technology, so that they have the same look and feel as if they were using their applications. And the other one is ongoing acquisition of skills. So we do put a lot of money on training in different channels, non-traditional ones, again, short videos and stuff like that. So they're definitely listening, but there's much more to be done.
So uphill battle, yes. I mean, that's the simplest answer. But I think it's also because in corporations, and especially in the changing landscape, when you're in disruption and startups and these, the market itself is always changing, right? So there is always a challenge of, being able to get different perspectives into areas that complacency is easier, right? Where everybody feels comfortable. And if you feel comfortable, our CEO has a saying, comfort and growth do not coexist, right? And that to this day remains very true for me every time I've encountered it. It doesn't mean the comfort is, it's a great feeling. It actually is a really sucky feeling, right? So, and if anybody has been through some of those times in their career, it really does stink. But you have to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so intergenerational, I will say, on two accounts. In the Global Innovation Core has been a source of, like I said, new ideas, fresh ideas, but also a place where you can find people that are passionate about the brand and passionate about, being able to change the landscape in the face. In the Asian American sense, as the TriState BRG, what we're trying to do is also intergenerationally within the community bring people together, right? So again, some of those biases, some of those quos that have inherently been part of our culture as well, it's an ongoing process, an ongoing journey to push the limits on those too, right? And a great example, I've got two IBMers in the room I'm gonna put on the spot, but it's, for me, I'm in the in-between right now. I'm sort of on the rising ranks, but I've had wonderful mentors like Peter up in the front row who's been with IBM, can I say it? Okay. Who's been with IBM for a relatively longer time than me. And then I have Jason in the back, who's our next gen, just joined IBM. And so this cycle of succession, regardless of Asian American or intergenerational, I think is incredibly important. And these relationships were not built overnight. Peter, I've known for all of my career at IBM, which has been 14 years. And a lot of people have called me a millennial unicorn at IBM, right? Because I've stayed much, much longer than most millennials. But I've also seen the value of being able to spread that opportunity around, right? So if we get a chance to talk later, I encourage you to come find me. I've had 7 roles in IBM, all in different industries, right? So I've been part of HR, been part of sales, been part of design. So I think in that sense of it, especially for all of our organizations, there is opportunity to grow laterally. So when we think as Asian Americans that the only place to go is up, right? I think there's also value in the growth and the horizons that we all make a career out of. And that's super important for us intergenerationally to convey to our younger generation, right? They're always looking for that promotion, always looking for that compensation. And it's true. Go get it. Go do you. But at the same time, it's this symbiotic intergenerational diversity and collaboration that truly think is the key to unlocking the value of your corporation, right? Because it's the experience, it's the wisdom, it's the living through it. And like we heard this morning, there's nothing like living through it, right? There's no book that can teach you about the soft skills that you learn. But on the other side, coming out of school, you're like, I can change the freaking world, right? I mean, met some millennials and Gen Zs who were like, I'm going to change this entire IBM. I'm like, good luck, we're 110 and 380,000 people, but okay. And so that energy is also super, infective, right? I tell our next gen team, they give me life. They give me the energy that they stepped out with. So it's very, very key that we're able to work 5 generations effectively together. So
Perfect.
I would say, just as some, advice, if any of you are having trouble with upper management, recognizing your ERG, whether generational themed or not, I think there's power in numbers, and so build your base, build your network within your employees, and make sure that you have a significant amount of members in your ERG, and to kind of prove to management and to upper echelons, if you aren't supported necessarily by HR or your CEO, that there are a lot of people in the workforce that are interested or a part of this group or affinity, and they're looking to make a change. And I think also, kind of going back to what you're saying, Christina, of what can that group provide the company. And so not just we're coming together as millennials to complain that we don't have enough technology, but we're coming together as millennials to help evolve the company to the next level, and really portraying the ERG, the benefits that ERG can have, not only on the culture but the business of any company.
Perfect.
So, you've all talked a little bit about what was on your mind, or heard from a colleague what was on their mind, and we now have a lot of input from our panelists as to what they've been doing. So I open up the floor now to anyone who wants to start raising questions and asking questions, and let's have a conversation. You were first.
I got a question. So, from the success of all of your work, which I commend all of you, what are some of the outcomes of a successful intergenerational integrated workforce, evidence-based as well as on an intangible level? And do you have any anecdotes to share with us?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start here. The outcomes have been, for us, really evolving around our portfolio and business growth. So we did lead, as part of the group, we did Next Gen Labs, which were client-facing, basically future-proofing our clients, right? So taking a group of our millennials and our next-gen crew, and cross-generational crew, eventually evolving to that, and then their cross-generational crew, putting them together in a room, doing a IBM design thinking session together, and really coming up with innovative ideas that they wouldn't have thought of by themselves. So our most recent one was with IKEA, right? So IKEA and plus the power of tech really is what came out of that. So that's just one example. We've had many other, I'll say, I like to call it executive inception. I don't know if anybody understands that, but what that means is, executives like the credit due to them, right? I'm sorry, it's just how it works. I'll be candid. This is being recorded, great. But, when we talk about, coming up with new ideas, right? We want to be able to say, we planted the seed, I'll say. So if you've seen the movie Inception, it's a dream within a dream, and really their point was to plant an idea, right? To plant a seed. And I'd like to say for our group, that's really been where the most outcomes have come out of, right? So for example, agile methodology, Slack usage, getting rid of our proprietary email and going towards more flexible email system. Support has greatly changed due to our roundtables with executive teams. And so all that was a byproduct of planting the seed and really coming together. I think what the qualitative was certainly engagement. I will say it wasn't retention, which is a big key, like, no for for me to say, right? Because that is the truth. Unfortunately, what we were banking on was that this would help retain our workforce a little longer in that generational gap, but it did not. And we could talk a little more about that challenge, but I think it's also a shift in thinking. Like my thing has been to our executive team, if they had a great experience here and tell their friends they had a great experience here and wind up boomeranging back to IBM, I'd be happy with that, right? Whereas in a traditional sense, you've come through IBM and then you've stayed for 25, 30 years. So I think it's also maybe a shift and a challenge in that thinking as far as, so we'll be honest, right? We thought it would be retention, wasn't retention. Engagement definitely for a certain period of time. And after a certain period of time, you have to be consistent and sustaining. So that was also a challenge for us, but happy to talk about it later.
So for us, our main focus is to make Bank of America a great place to work. And we do have, obviously, a Voice of Employee every year. And D&I and employee networks are part of this. So we do receive the scores, and we do see improvement year-on-year basis. So we do see a direct, benefit to our existence and our mission. That's it.
I would just add that there's definitely been some tangible actions that have come out of the ERG that, not necessarily that we have numbers to, but that really around the fact of innovation and making sure that the company is staying innovative. So, one of them was kind of making sure that the upper management and older generations were hearing the ideas of the millennials, but then that the millennials were actually flushing out those ideas too, and not just kind of throwing them out. And so with that, we had an event series that ended with one group of millennials idea being implemented in our Herald Square store of experiential beauty pop-up shop. And it wasn't necessarily successful in the traditional ways that we measure things. So from a sales perspective, it wasn't, a huge sales driver. It was also placed in the basement, so that was a little. But it did engage the consumer on our social media network, which we have had a lot of trouble with. And so there were learnings from it. And so I do think that there's tangible results that you can see from whether it's intergenerational collaboration or just basically utilizing the different advantages from each generation. But I do think that, it is hard. And I think from a retention standpoint and a culture standpoint, it is hard to see those tangible effects. And so I think it needs to be kind of a collaboration of the people who are very passionate about it, and then talking to the people at the head of the organization, and so that it can kind of trickle down into the middle so that everybody's passionate about it and everyone's aware. But unfortunately, tangible results are hard other than surveys and things like that.
Yeah.
I just want to make one comment in relation to that. Even if there is turnover in this new generation, because people now do turnover, there is something to be said for if somebody leaves and says it was a great place to work, it was exciting.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We
Absolutely.
got to do some new things.
Yep.
Because that's the word on the street.
Absolutely.
So another
Totally.
kind of outcome is the
Sure.
reputation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of questions.
We got a lot of basics. Why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
I'm Marcela Gordon from Latin Insights, and congratulations on
Gracias.
everything you're doing and for being so candid as well. We do a lot of studies on the arena of diversity and inclusion, and something that we find a lot, particularly with younger generations, is that, they do have a bad reputation. People don't understand it. But the reason why they leave, we need to understand why they're leaving, and on all the research that we do, usually is because they want better opportunities, more money, but also because they feel they're not being heard. So something that we've been working on is on the idea that the traditional way of communicating through HR and all of that is very frustrating for younger and now also for older employees, because they feel that they are not getting anything done or they don't get to really upper management. So I'm wondering, we're launching an app that we're hoping will fix that. But do you think there will be appetite for something like that to change the traditional way, or
Yeah.
companies that are very well established, like IBM or
Yeah.
any of you will be very resistant to change and they will continue with the traditional way? Because we find that younger companies that start up, they embrace new ways of communication, but the more
Yeah.
traditional ones, we're not sure they're going to be open to that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I know that the traditional ways, I believe, are not going to go away so fast. However, we are implementing a softer parallel approach where we are redesigning the one-on-one and the feedback that we give to our people. So we have a lot of information around the fact that they want a 5-minute feedback every 2 weeks. We have a traditional monthly one-on-one that we have totally restructured, and the open floor plan has helped a lot. So I think that what will happen is we'll have both. There are audit compliance issues, stuff like that that will enforce that we have a traditional way as well. That's my personal view.
Yeah, I would also add that I think there are a lot of different strategies out there. So 360 reviews, where everyone's reviewed, not just bottom down or top down. And then there's also different kind of different feedback models.
Yeah.
Also, mentoring, I think, has helped a lot, either one-on-one or just in general, for the younger generation to feel like they're being heard. But I would also say that it's like any change, it's gonna be hard, and so it's what I would almost want to encourage, the younger generation in the workforce that might feel discouraged that they're not being heard, is to keep trying and to keep pushing, because whether it might not be because they're a younger generation and that's not why people are listening. It might be because change is hard and people sometimes are averse to change. And so, just keeping at it and keeping pushing what you're passionate about, I think helps, in addition to those different, tools about, different feedbacks and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And similar to what Kristen said, power in numbers, right? So when we think about traditional consumers, we send them surveys all the time, right? What do you think? You guys probably get spammed with so many surveys every time you buy something. But that's the essential, that's where your feedback should be coming from. So instead of the clients or the customers, it's our employees, right? It's the reason why they want to stay. The most common threads have been career development, compensation, right, promotions. And that takes a little bit of education from our managers team and our leadership team too, right? That it's about the ever-growing career, it's about the skills, it's about the experiences that you're going to go through. So I think in essence, it's very situational and it's very two-sided, right? So you're not going to have a silver bullet as far as, being able to fix it in one shot, but it's more moving the needle in every organization. And I will say for us personally, we used to have a performance-based review system, very formal. Everybody gets a number at the end of the year, from 1 to 3, 1 to 2 plus 3, 1 being obviously the best. But that was a crucial point where we pivoted from input from our next gen core on the fact that they did not feel that was fair, right? So now it's much more of a softer skill set based assessment, and we call it checkpoint for performance. So that's entirely changed because of the input that we got from the constituency. And when I say constituency, just think about it just like your client or any type of consumer, right? You're trying to find out what's going to work for that.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
As you said, collaboration and communication is key, intergenerational. However, we all know that the mindset of the baby boomers is different from those coming into the workforce. So it's more email, social media. How do you bridge that gap, and are there any innovative strategies that you've been able to implement this cross-collaboration?
I think a key thing for us has been be a human, Sounds simple enough, right? But be human, be kind, and have empathy, right? And what we found is a lot of reverse mentoring has worked really well because each side feels they're getting, one side is being listened to and the other side is learning a new skill, right? So we've done a lot of digital tech, especially for us as a tech company, we've done a lot of digital tech reverse mentoring as just one example. But I think my simplest answer is empathy on all fronts, right?
Yeah, it's more about awareness, knowing that there's a difference. There's no right or wrong. It's just that everybody has to realize there are different ways of communicating and just don't be upset. Just take a step back and realize that there are different ways of doing things.
Exactly, acknowledging and
Yeah.
just having that conversation.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I'm even learning that,
Yeah.
We don't have reverse mentoringship, and,
Yeah.
and I'm taking note in my
Yes.
head, like, okay, we should bring that back to,
Yeah.
to Macys. So I think it's just having those conversations and being open and honest about it.
Perfect example. I taught Peter how to use Slack. Hated Slack, right? Hated Slack.
What, Louis on the PepsiCo, what advice would you have for those of us who actually may not have the generational themed ERG, right? So we
Yeah.
may have ERG for Asian Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, military veterans, so on and so forth. But what if we don't have a generational themed
Yeah.
ERG? Where would you, do we start cohort in cohort? Do we create a new ERG? Do we attempt to create a cross-sectional, leviathan?
So basically, the Bank of America philosophy was that we do need a separate ERG. I would, but sometimes I think we also do a lot of D&I stuff that is not so structured in terms of enterprise networks. So anything that you guys do to get together, you can start theming that as an intergenerational. I'll give you an example. You can have a trivia night and invite generations and kind of joke about what they know or don't know. So you can take the humor side of the intergenerational differences, and then this becomes a much bigger thing.
Just to add to that, if you haven't seen it before, Ellen had a millennial try to use a rotary phone and find a phone number
yes.
in the yellow pages, and it was hilarious. So you should definitely go look it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would definitely say that I think having a separate ERG that does focus on cross-generational collaborating is key, and because each ERG has their own initiatives and objectives, and that might be in the back of their mind, but you need some group that could be small that's focused on that if it's something that you and the company are passionate about changing and updating. But I do think if there is any pushback, I think an intergenerational ERG could be easier than trying to have 5 different ERGs for the 5 different generations that are in the workforce. So that might be a kind of an easy way to get your foot in the door.
I think it comes out of outcomes, for your company and for anybody, it's all different, right? So in PepsiCo's case, do you need it? Do you need something that's dedicated so that it's focused and you're focusing on a common problem, right? So is there a need for market research in the next generation or generations to come? I think it really comes out of an outcome. So often we do things because somebody else is doing it, but really we also have to come back to our clients and our users who are our employees. Do they feel like they need it? And if there's enough cross-generational collaboration going on already, then you probably don't, right? And in that case, that's an awesome thing to have. If you do feel like it would be a benefit, what value does it bring, right? What would it actually help you guys accomplish a bit better? I think for us, like I said, it really was to bridge our workforce. It seems like from Macys, it really also stemmed from like a consumer and Bank of America from a consumer need to stay relevant in the brand and in the market. So I think it's really important to also understand the why. And if you don't have one and want to start one, right? Like, you don't have to be a millennial or Gen Z to do a cross-generational effort or ERG, and I think that's the same for any of us. If your company doesn't have an Asian ERG or anything that you feel like is a need, start it. Just do it, right? Like, no harm in trying, and I think that's the key thing too. I think for us as Asian Americans, failure is a little risky, and it's a little uncomfortable, and it's incredibly not something we were brought up with, right? You know, for a lot of you in the room, it was, you know, if you got a 96%, where's the other 4 points, right? As they say, and that's true. Yes. That is true to a lot of other cultural differences too. So I think with that, it's experiment. Be agile, be nimble, all that good stuff. Is it hard? Absolutely. We can sit up here and say it, but definitely not an easy process because, again, you do come through these challenges. And, again, we'll try and be candid about those challenges so that you can learn from them and hopefully generate something out.
I would just say that if you are thinking about starting an ERG, and you're a little bit nervous, there are so many people who are thinking the same exact thing. And what I've learned is that I've just become very surprised. You know, holding an event, I thought nobody would come, and we had 200 people come. So, you know, it might be a little daunting, but I guarantee you there are people out there that have the same thought or same passion as you.
And I would say sponsorship was key for us too. I don't know for you guys, but sponsorship too. You know, having the buy-in of somebody up top who can see your outcome and really help you drive that and fund that. I know funding's also a huge, you know, we haven't not talked about that as a challenge, but let's be all honest, right? I mean, ERGs for sure have a cutback in funding and even things like this. So, you know, best advice I ever got from one of my mentors was, how do you do it for free? So that you could start there.
You were passionate about getting recognized.
Okay.
I'm Tanya Gilpatrick. I'm an executive and business coach. Thank you very much, panelists. I'm also, just to admit, a Generation X and still feel that I can change the world. So I'm in that group.
Love it.
All of your organizations, I assume, have multiple ERGs. So the question I have is, do your ERGs work autonomously? Do any of your ERGs work collectively? And which is best? Which approach would be best?
Yeah, so we are very competitive. So right now we're number 3 out of 10. We were number 4 a year ago. It depends on the market, to be honest. In New York, we try to do things together because there's so much going on. So we do both. We have specific goals in terms of membership growth. And then once we hit these goals, we start collaborate with others. That's a cycle that we do on a yearly basis. We do have some more friendly ERGs than others. I think mainly because we try to own the reverse mentoring. So many people, many other ERGs come to us and they want to collaborate with us because we have much more knowledge around this. But there's not one or the other. It's just making our goals first and then collaborate.
I would say Macys does a really good job of our ERGs collaborating. Not only do we have members that are part of multiple ERGs, but we also have events that are kind of ERG fairs to kind of bring up the awareness of ERGs in total. And then we also partner with other ERGs to do different events. So, you know, if one ERG is focused on XYZ and we're not as much, but we kind of want to do an event with that, then we kind of partner with them. And so, and then I also think it's really important as leaders of the ERGs to talk and to get together, because we found that when we do get together and we talk about best practices or just some of the roadblocks that we've hit, a lot of them are the same, and someone has a solution for it that we wouldn't have found if we hadn't asked that person or talked to them. So I think it was very, very crucial to have kind of, you know, you can have your own ERG and they can have their own events and goals and whatnot, interests, but I think that kind of combining ERGs as a whole and lifting it all up as kind of ERGs and culture is very important.
Sure.
Yeah, I think for us, there's a lot of intersectionality, and I think that's the next door panel, right? Hopefully there's a replay of that where you can get some ideas. But we are incredibly intersectional because we're all employees of IBM at the end of the day. Right? So for us, it's really about pushing the needle forward for all of us. I think for the minority groups, the cultural groups like the Black ERG, the Asian ERG, Native American, and so on, I think there's more of a camaraderie there because of our mutual goals, right? So it's really based around leadership development, around representation. I think in the three I'll say larger constituencies we have are women, LGBT+, and people with disabilities, or neurodiversity as we call it now. That has a lot more folks from all different walks of life, right? It's not just an ethnic group or whatnot. So when we say culturally, we kind of come together a little more. It's because each of our cultures also have very distinct behaviors or things we've been brought up with. So that's why, we still do within our own groups have individual goals. But as the intersectionality piece, again, if we all come up together, right? And that's super key for us. I will also say that, I think it's important to have both, but it's also important to distinguish both. Because for us in the Asian community, there is other challenges. And I would say we've also probably opened up our community to the other BRGs, right? And don't traditionally, for Asian Americans, I will say the LGBT plus community was not a community we're attuned to usually, right? But through conversations, through awareness, through dialogue, you realize people are people again at the end of the day. And so understanding their perspective and their difficulties was incredibly important of also helping them belong, right?
Yeah.
We're almost on top of the time, but I just want to get a show of hands of how many people feel they've gotten something out of here that they didn't have before they walked in. I just want to have a general show of hands.
You don't have to. You can be very honest, please.
So I want to kind of, for those of you who didn't raise your hands, do you have a question or a comment? I literally want to invite those of you that still kind of, because I know some of you got something. I just want to invite, since a lot of people raise their hands, I just wanted to kind of give you guys a chance to ask a question, raise a comment, oppose, push back.
Yeah.
Well, I just wondered did we give up studying individual differences? Maybe like we're only looking at groups and we forget that everybody's different.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're also talking about within our own groups, right? Asian Americans are individually different, but as far as like each person wise, right? We all bring something different to the table, which is precisely why I think this cross-generational thing works. Because there are, like you said, 5 generations in the workforce. We have to be able to work together. If you don't, then it's just all going to crumble, right? It's not just one corporation versus another, it's the world.
And I think it's really important to, yes, have these groups, but then have dialogue with other groups and so that everybody realizes that there are individual differences and not one millennial is not like the other necessarily. And so I do think it's important to kind of raise that awareness of, every person has different things going on in their life and different challenges, and what are those challenges, and how can we kind of go against the status quo of what we might think of certain groups, whether it's generations or minorities or whatnot. How do we have a conversation about it and say, okay, we're not treating people as individuals, how can we?
I agree. I mean, it's all about how do we are trying to explain why we're different. So it's very difficult to explain it, but we're just trying to put some, fundamentals around it. And obviously, as I said, diversity as a meaning has evolved so much. And that's because of the dialogue, so.
And everybody's career is different. Everybody's journey is incredibly different. So I want you to walk out of here and be like, oh, I got to emulate or anything. It's incredibly different for each person, and I think that's the value it brings too, right? Is that each person has had their own experiences to be able to bring to the table. So, I think that's incredibly important to internalize and also be self-aware about.
I just want to comment that it seems to me having these groups also gives individuals a place where they get the support to explore more who they are, their unique identity,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
to
very
and
true.
how it relates to being in this company and being with these other people. And I think it's a safe. It could be a safer environment than just being in the company in your
Yep.
little department.
Yeah.
Living.
Definitely.
But anyway, we are on top of the time.
Awesome.
Unless there's someone with a burning question or some comment that you guys want to make or anyone here wants to make, you know, I just want to thank everyone for being here.
Thank you.
And really
Thanks for listening. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.